Hello, everyone. We're gonna have our third lecture of the fall semester of 2022. We will be broadcasting this also, hopefully, with no hiccups or problems. And well, as you all probably know, the theme of the semester is healing environments. And today we're gonna have someone that speaks to that question more from the strictly architectural point of view. We had one that was a lecture that was more focused on landscape and nature. And today we're gonna have the Chilean architect Isabel Rivera, which is a real pleasure. When I was thinking about this morning driving here about the fact that we bring in someone all the way from Chile, I started to kind of understand that we have had, during the last year, we have had architects from Ethiopia, France, Brazil, Spain, Chile. So so I don't think we have had many American architects in the last whole year, but I hope it is being a very enriching experience for you all, hearing all these voices and perspectives coming from very, very different places, right? So to present Isabel today, we're gonna have Assistant Professor Lindsay Deaton, who brought her here and is hosting her today, and I think she will be introducing her indeed.
Yeah. Thank you, David. I'm super excited to be able to have Isabel here to present. Dr. Rivera is a very well-published scholar in indoor environmental quality. She specifically has focused on working in school environments, but you'll see that her work really applies to many different institutional and building environments. So when you want to think about sustainability, you want to think about environmental design, and the details of the placement of the windows, and how you test that, what software do you use, how do you show that, Isabel's going to do an amazing job of showing you how her research actually ties the details and the testing to the principles of design, and how she carries that through into her architectural practice. Of course, she's a woman that does pretty much everything. So she's also a teacher. She's an associate professor at the Universidad de Concepción in Concepción, Chile. She did her PhD at the University of Oregon, and her work was published at the Architecture Research Centers Consortium. And so this is my small plug also to those of you that are interested in research work in architecture. There's a call for abstracts, and I noticed today that the travel grants came out. So if you're looking to fund a trip to present your own work, you can follow in Dr. Rivera's footsteps. So with that, I would like to hand it off to Dr. Rivera.
Can everyone hear me? Perfect. Well, thank you both, David and Lindsay, for this invitation, and for you as well, for students, to come and join this afternoon in the middle of your studio. So I really appreciate your time here and actually your presence here, because I think what I'm trying to do is also talk about how you can see architecture not necessarily as a profession where you work in a firm or where you work in design, but your input can also have a big impact in terms of research. As architects, we can actually create very innovative problem solving because of the way we are kind of taught and how we do problem solving. As Lindsay already said, and she mentioned, I'm associate professor at the Universidad de Concepción in the Department of Architecture. And I have also been working and including into research. I'm also part of a consortium of two universities, Universidad Católica and Universidad de Concepción, where we have this cluster of research called Center for Sustainable Development, Urban Development, called CEDEUS, where we do multidisciplinary research across all different fields. And we are answering questions about how to make more habitable cities, how to make more habitable neighborhoods, and also to the point of the scale of the building. And I'm going to try to talk a little bit more about that. I also co-founded the research lab, what we call Vital Science. It's a new laboratory that we have created in our department together with another colleague, Andrea Martinez. and where we basically do a lot of research, where we simulate. We also take measurements of buildings, and we try to connect the design process with technology. And finally, I was also be able, during the pandemic, a colleague of us, and I'm going to talk to a little bit more about that, we got together, 3 women, 3 PhD students. Eventually, we became all PhDs, and they said, why don't we just build our own firm, where we actually are tackling research based on, informing design based on research. So we created this firm called RAT, which I'm going to show you at the end of the presentation a little bit about the work that we've done in the last 2 years. So I'm just going to briefly go a little bit over that. To give you a little bit of scope and context, Chile, it's in Latin America, very thin, long country. If you didn't know, we don't eat chili, so a lot of people say, well, you eat a lot of chili from Chile. Nope, it's not true. This is an image of Concepcion. It's a city that has a very unique landscape. We have many lakes and rivers, like you see here, and we're actually the second biggest city in the country. And because of that, we also are basically a campus university. What you see here, we are our university, Universidad de Concepción, is like the only campus that is open to the public, like you will have here in the U.S. In Chile, that is not very common, and the fact that our university, it's actually part of the neighborhood of the city. Everyone, all the neighbors, all the people that live in the city feel part of this university. Some have studied in the university, some have not, but because it's an open campus, it becomes everyone's background, and it actually became a very popular place during the pandemic. Just to tell you a little bit about my background, I did study in the same university that I'm teaching. Since 2010, I'm teaching there. But just to give you a reference, a little bit of how this has shaped me as a designer, we have a faculty, what we call faculty in Spanish, it will be like a college in here. We integrate 3 different departments: architecture, urban planning, or urbanism, and geography. And so we basically approach this multiple scales of problems within the city. And we try to integrate that interdisciplinary collaboration between the geographers, who also not necessarily study, spatial analysis, but also social work, understanding how people interact in the built environment. And then we also integrate the architect component of building design together with urban planning. So I have a lot of this has very informed my research approach and also my design process in terms of how do we integrate all these multiple scales, which are very important if you're approaching sustainability. You cannot isolate a building, from the rest of this context. You cannot isolate a city from the rest of its region, and thereon. So it's a way of kind of going in and out on these multiple scales. And I think it's a good way for you to understand, and a little bit what I'm going to show you now with my students' works that we have done, just a few projects, of how you can see the different approaches that we do. And there might be some remembrances with your schoolwork as well. So one project that we did, and it was integrated to a workshop that was part of an international conference, is that we designed this vertical studio. We have students from different classes, from 3rd year to all the way to 6th year. And we work in this part of town in the southern part of Chile, which is an island called Chiloé. And it's a very unique vernacular architectural where a lot of the houses are in stills along the waterfront. And they had a lot of issues, especially the local community, of how we can actually approach the waterfront. There was no many landscape developed or access to the water. It was very segregated. And you had this beautiful landscape, of kind of like a rural setting together with, fjords and a lot of islands along it. And we work with a very well-known architect who's a national architectural award prized many years ago, who's Eduardo Rojas. And we worked with him to design this conference, but we had this piece of the conference that was a workshop where we collaborated with students local community and also with local practitioners to have like an intensive workshop, kind of like what you experienced lately this past weekend from what I understood in a competition. What we worked with them for over a weekend, and they work with students to create schemes. Our students previously developed a whole master plan to understand the whole problems along this waterfront in the big island of Chiloé, specifically in the city of Castro. And then they defined different zones that they wanted to zoom in and develop into further urban design, which are these parts in here that you see in this planning. So they were doing pulling overnighters, just like regular architecture students, even though these were a professional architects, so they embargo in that task. And it was very fun because they didn't only get the feedback between the students and the professions, but we also integrated that with the keynote speakers from this conference. So the keynote speakers also participated in this workshop and provided some feedback to them. And then at the end of the weekend, we developed a whole different strategies and site analysis and basically creating images of what could happen in terms of what different schemes can actually be developed in the future. So this information helped the local planners, the local people that work in the municipality, to inform future projects that they can fund and then they can develop, that normally they don't have the time to do. So I think in that respect, there's a lot of work that we try to do that our studios are addressed in terms of problem solving of local communities on real problems. So a lot of the input that we develop is on that. And at the end of that weekend, our students took that information and developed their own individual projects, which is what you see here. So some of them decided to do different centers for arts, or some actually decided some lodging, or different types of program that they were integrated. And then at the end of the studio, they were able to go from a very, very big scale of urban planning, to a small urban design, all the way to an individual project. So they got to see the whole scope and the integration of this multiple scale, which I find it's very interesting. And a lot of times, depending on the studio velocity, you don't get to see that whole range of scales. Another project that I collaborated and participated is a solar cluster competition, which was sort of like a design build like you have here. It's a project that was unique in its form. It was the first time that we actually did a national competition across multiple schools in architecture. And it was very new, so that students have to develop a whole project. The whole thing was to develop and to create some sort of solution for housing. So our students decided to do sort of like a house extension. A lot of the times, housing happens in the ground level, but there's a lot of need to upgrade that house. So they developed this scheme of, why don't we build something on top, and that house on the second floor can be more the habitable space and can be a very efficient housing for people to live in. And so they started to design a lot of passive strategies, incorporated also active strategies like solar panels. And then they have this whole system of natural ventilation through this shaft, the vertical stairway, and maximizing solar radiation on the north facade. One thing to remember, I'm in the south hemisphere, so sun actually moves on the north side, not on the south. So the task that was really hard, it was that they also have to, it didn't quite work out as Solar Decathlon, where they have a whole methodology and a whole infrastructure. This was the first time, so we actually have to come up with money to raise for building this, and that was really hard because it's not very common in our country, to have public and private companies to actually support this type of building. We had to do testing. They designed this frame of wood structure, and it was a prototype where we actually create this unique module that was added and then created the different sections of the house. That also helped to move this all the way to Santiago, because the whole site of the competition was in Santiago, which is about 600 kilometers, about 400 miles away. So they have to travel overnight in 3 trucks. So the whole design actually was designed to fit in these 3 trucks. And that's the final product that you see here. They built it inside together with the other houses. And they actually won 3rd place. So we were actually really proud of this first time competition where it was a design build that happened in a year. Eventually, the house came back to our campus, and this is a night picture of our campanile. And actually, the house right now is part of a research and also student program that they use in the university. So actually, right now, the house itself is part of the campus. If you get your degree in Chile, you eventually go through a lot of years of undergrad, but then there's a professional year, a year and a half. And in Chile, once you get your professional degree, you're a licensed architect. So in order, you don't have to go through the whole process that you do here. It's the equivalent to a master's in terms of extent of the length of the profession. But that fifth year, that fifth and sixth year, it's a professional year where you have to develop on your own, and you have to show that you have the knowledge to develop a whole project on your own. So what our students do is that they choose a topic. They have an advisor who guides them and helps them, but at the end of the day, they're on their own. And they develop a project from the beginning to end, all the way through the schematic design, detailing, and as you see here, you fill up an entire room of blueprints, and you have to do a public defense, like a formality of that. And once you do that, you're granted your license. This process during the pandemic changed completely because we have to do everything online through Zoom. So that was a whole gamble of how do you see all these amounts of blueprints and plans, in just a computer monitor. But it did happen. It did work out, and eventually this is how the process ends. So we don't have a master's. We have master's program, but the profession itself leads to a professional title. So now I'm going to move a little bit more into my area of research and how this relationship between the built environments and its relationship to health and well-being and people is connected. So when I was trying to figure out a combination of how to do, how to teach and also how to incorporate research, I started thinking of this image that reminded me when I was in school. And it's an image that sadly hasn't changed much from the current conditions of classroom spaces in our classrooms in Chile. The significant time that you spend indoors, just the fact that you're here, right? And you've probably been here in the whole day, indoors, and you haven't gone out. We just took a little quick walk with Lindsay. But a lot of the times we don't pay attention to that, and especially during the pandemic, right? We were completely indoors, and we became more aware of our conditions, right? Of our indoor conditions. And it's interesting to find out, what are the school settings? What are those conditions in the school setting, and how are they promoting, performance or, health to the students? How are we actually engaging, that whole time that we spend indoors, promoting that instead of, having places like this where kids can barely see the wall, right, or the screen if you're projecting something. So we have to figure out ways to promote that. And then when I was paying attention to my country, and I was looking at all the different climate zones, and you can see in the northern part, we have the driest desert in the world, which is San Pedro de Atacama. Or if you go to the extreme south, we have the evergreen forest, or if you like hiking, you probably might know about this place, this is Patagonia, Torres del Paine. It's a very popular place for hiking and doing a lot of outdoors activities. And then in the center, we have the center valleys, kind of like Napa Valley, kind of like California. So how are classrooms, I was asking myself, are classrooms actually responding to this diversity of climate, diversity of temperatures along? And because we're a coastal country, how are we actually incorporating that? And to my surprise, we're not. The classroom that you see in the north part versus the south part are the same. And probably, the classroom that you see here are very boring, are not very attractive, right? I've actually stayed away from innovation in terms of providing the best environment for our students. Let alone, we have very high density classrooms. We got about 40 kids in only 50 square meters. So it's very limited space and air volume. And especially now during COVID, this has become a big issue. We also have other problems that related to the design, the envelope of the building. They're so poor, we don't have standards that can actually be more stringent like you have in here, where we can actually say, okay, we need a better envelope that can prevent, for example, images like this leaking, air filtrations, providing condensation because of the changes of temperature, because of no insulation in the envelopes. And how we are optimizing that when we have a classroom that is completely packed with active students, right? Active people that are energetic and, they're providing a lot of CO2 particles in the environment. If you're not venting, it's going to happen that you're going to fall asleep. So, and then what is the difference between, summer or closer to summer season, right? We have, because of that envelope so weak and so permeable, we have overheating situations where in the winter we have freezing cold temperatures indoors. So I was asking myself, so how is this impacting health? And then when I was starting to look and studying a little bit the research that I was doing in my PhD, I started to find out that standards are actually built for adults, are built for suits, person with suits in an office space that don't even move. And then we have kids running around during break times, at least twice or 3 times during the day. They're sweating and they come all active to the classroom that doesn't provide the good temperatures that you need. So the fact that we need to sort of understand the relationship that students have with their environment, what are their expectations? Because a lot of the times when you see a lot of these studies are done for adults, which can answer, for example, surveys, or they can actually are able to express their conditions, a lot of the times those are not done for kids, because a lot of times, how do you do a survey to a kid, right? How is this going to understand those type of questions? So I was very interested to find out, the role, understanding their perception, how is their socioeconomic also impacts this perception of their space. So I did a study during my PhD that I wanted to characterize the physical condition of thermal comfort and indoor quality in classrooms. I wanted to also understand their perception and how is it differ from the teachers. Because a lot of the times you don't get that dual relationship or interaction between, and see how they might differ depending on the different seasons. And finally, to identify if there's actually a perception in terms of thermal perception, if it can be different depending on the school type. I wanted to see if the socioeconomic actually could impact it in that decision. So I did multiple schools across Concepcion. This is the city of Concepcion, and this is the city of San Pedro. This is the river. So I did 9 schools and 28 classrooms, and I evaluated both during the fall term and then during winter term to see the differences. I did surveys in addition to measure the physical conditions. Did more than 1,600 surveys responses during the fall, and then about 600 during winter. These are some of the case studies of the school. I tried to pick schools that had similar layout, so at least there were not so many confounding factors in terms of design, and most of that, as I explained you before, classrooms are pretty much the same. They don't differ much. They might be a couple of meters. They always have one single glazed window, like you see here, and most of the schools in Chile, for the most part, are completely passive. There's no heating system. And if there is, it's always turned off because the electricity bill is always high, and a lot of schools cannot pay for it. There's no mechanical system, so you rely completely on opening that window to promote air movement. So I measure physical conditions by installing instruments in the middle of the classroom, try to mimic the situation of a student in the middle of the classroom. And while I was doing that, I was asking them questions. How do you feel right now? Would you prefer a different temperature? Would you prefer to be cold? Do you prefer to be warm? And I was trying to collect that data through tablets, and that actually attracted them, because they wanted to play with the tablets. So that was a little bit of an engagement reaction to get them involved in the surveys. And then this is what I found out. As you see here in this image, across from this infrared image, across all schools, private to public schools, and then subsidized schools, which are the type of schools that we have, the conditions were pretty bad. The envelope is basically very low temperatures, as you see in the blue, and then the only source of energy in the classrooms is the students, as you see there. Then we have this multicolor array of multiple ways of doing curtains, which doesn't also provide the best lighting conditions, especially if you're trying to, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, trying to catch up your professor, from the screen. So it's really hard, to live and to let alone being here for a whole year, because the students that I pick are middle school students that are actually here in the same classroom for all the classes, except for maybe PE or arts. So it's very rough, right? And as a student, it's very hard, not alone for the teachers as well. And then I know I'm going to get too much in details in this, but this is just to show you, and you probably seen some of this in your ECS class if you have taken ECS, a psychrometric chart, which it shows you the curves of humidity and then temperature, dry bulb temperature outside. And what you see here, these are the different colors. Green is for public, blue is for private, and then private subsidized. Most of the schools are way up in terms of humidity, and especially the public schools, as you see in the green. And then when I try to cross that information with the standards like ash rate, all the temperatures completely out of this comfort zone that the American Association of Engineers have established. This is the zone that you want to kind of create for comfort. If you have a completely outdoor and passive school, but most of the temperatures that I measure are completely outside. So I asked the students, how do you feel? Are you comfortable enough in this space? And to my surprise, all say yes. So most of the people, 82, 79, 78 in winter, were feeling comfortable. And I was kind of shocked because I thought maybe they will respond differently. But it seems like they are doing measurements to become adapted in these environments. Even though it's cold, a lot of them were wearing mittens, scarves, jackets. Some of them bring coffee or hot tea. They were trying to mediate those conditions of, since the classroom is not providing me a comfortable, well-sealed envelope, well, then I have to do something about it. Or my parents are going to do something about it so I don't get a cold, right, during winter. The same thing happened with the teachers. Even though the teachers were moving from one classroom to the next, they also felt pretty comfortable. Or at least they were not worried about feeling very cold or very warm during the fall. I did ask him questions about the air quality, and that was a tricky question to evaluate, but a lot of the times they did respond that they were feeling comfortable. And in here you can see across the different school types, most of the responses fall in the center line where they were feeling comfortable. So even different, there might be some slightly differences between one school to the next. For the most part, they were feeling comfortable. So that's an opportunity for me to also start digging a little bit more deeper about how do we can compromise, the condition of a classroom and with the adaptiveness that professors and teachers have. But I did find that our indoor environmental qualities are really bad. And this is just to show you a graph that I did. This is pre-COVID, before COVID. So I took a long measurement during the morning and afternoon. And then what you see in blue, these are the breaks. So we had 3 breaks. And so as soon as school starts, we almost reach 5,000 ppm. And the threshold, as you know, it's about 1,000 or 700 ppm. So we went 4 times that. And that's because my sensor reached its max. So if I actually had a sensor that could actually measure more than 5,000, I probably would have gone even beyond that. And it's very, very consistent in terms of, as soon as we start having the afternoon, it starts to warm up, then you can open more of the windows, then it starts to drop down that value. But for the most part in the morning, it's an issue, and it's been a very hard issue. The same thing with particulate matter. Because we live in the southern part of Chile, we use a lot of combustion to heat most of our houses. So there's a lot of bad problems with air quality in the winter, especially 2.5 ppm, which are the particle in the air. And we also have very high concentration on that during the day. In the morning, all the way to afternoon, we couldn't even reach the threshold by the World Health Organization. So I thought, okay, even though people feel comfortable, even people are doing measurements, we're still not providing those good conditions, right? Some people got adjusted. People got sort of adjusted and tried to mitigate that. And so a few relationships in terms of understanding this and some conclusions is that we have to provide, because of the crowdiness, we have to consider how are we going to provide better indoor quality, right? And because of that, how we're actually making better comfort solutions for public schools as well as private subsidized, where I found to be the most significant difference between public and subsidized, which I thought it would be private. And then for the most part, one of the things that I did find out is that students and teachers use adaptive mechanism to find, like adding clothes, drinking hot coffee, to actually find, more comfortable conditions. But that led me to understand, okay, we have bad conditions. We have to figure out a way, how is it affecting students? And that's how kind of like everything led, once I finished my PhD, I came back to school, started teaching again, and we built together with another colleague this lab called Vital Signs Lab, which our main focus is to develop conditions and measure those conditions in physical environments. So one of the grants that I have right now and that I'm working on, that I was granted by NSF, equivalent to NSF, who also funded my PhD, is to understand a little bit how the different environmental factors are impacting students' health and also their performance. So I'm going to try to figure out ways that I can mitigate or a little bit minimize those conditions through low-cost interventions and see if that actually can have an impact on their performance. My friend is also doing a lot of work on trying to retrofitting school facilities. So we're trying to integrate both of our research, her specialty in retrofitting, my specialty to looking in the inside, and how to promote that. One project that I wanted to show you and see how you as a students can also be engaged, and part of my teaching philosophy is to engage students through this whole process. Not only just you learning from like theory, but also an applied knowledge based. So that your decision making can also be applicable through measurements, through qualitative and quantitative analysis. So one project that we participated in that it wasn't not being able to be done at all if it wasn't for the help and commitment from our students is that we did this evaluation of indoor conditions in 10 libraries, 10 branch libraries across the campus, as you see here. There's, our university has a wide range of faculties and colleges, but the conditions, as some of the librarians brought up, their conditions are not very good. And the conditions where we kept actually very historic files and books, are not well kept. So we did an evaluation with the Department of Ergonomics to do a multidisciplinary research in terms of understanding what those conditions were in terms of daylighting analysis, indoor quality, and acoustics, and also the ergonomics in terms of figuring out the dimension if the furniture is correct for that type of person. And we did this, especially the first 3, we did it in 2 phases to figure out what the conditions were in winter, what the conditions were in the summer. And then for the ergonomics, we just did it in a year round. We also have to find out what the standards are, what the standards were providing some thresholds. We did find out that in Chile, we didn't have any standards specifically for libraries, so we have to rely on international standards and to find like a fine tuning, okay, how far can we aim towards that research so we can evaluate those spaces. And then we went into the multiple libraries. Our students ended up doing a whole work in terms of doing a lot of survey, because a lot of times the libraries didn't even have floor plans, so we have to do all these elevations, floor planning. And then we start collecting data, like you see here. For example, for daylighting analysis, we actually have to take multiple points in the space and then measure the illuminance distribution. And then in order to analyze that data, we also use another software and analysis like HDR imaging, where we can actually study a little bit more in detail, not only the distribution and luminance in the space, but how does it affect the visual comfort of the people that work there, their working environment. So just I'm going to show you some quick analysis that we did. Like in here, you see we did 3 different iterations for the most part, depending on in the libraries. We have one option where the lights were off and the curtains were completely open, just to see like what are the conditions if you don't have any lights on, and the natural lighting, it's providing the maximum illumination in that space. Then we turn off the lights to see the difference, how much can you gain in the space if you turn the artificial lighting, and then we close the shutters or the curtains depending on the condition of that library, and to see how much it's helping out. And for the most part, as you see here, what we wanted to try is to find a distribution that's very uniform, and it didn't happen. A lot of the areas where people worked were very dark. Even the lighting, artificial lighting, was not providing enough illuminance to perform, to do well job and be more proactive with your work. A couple examples. For example, in this library, as you see here, the lights were on, no curtains. Then we turn off, we close the shutters, and we see that the light doesn't provide enough illuminance. So even lighting, in terms of what fixtures you put, you select, can actually become almost like an ornament if they're not well designed, if they're not well put. And that also can have an impact on the users of this space. This is the analysis that we did, for example, trying to understand that through an HDR imaging and false color imaging through a computer processing software. And then we can see, for example, the impact that can have at the workstation of the librarian. For example, if you have no curtains, with curtains, and the different contrasts and intensity of luminance between looking at a window that doesn't have anything to block out that direct sunlighting and having something, and then your eyes are constantly trying to adjust and try to change into that conditions. In here, it's another example, like what a blackout or like a curtain can actually have in terms of the space, or if, for example, if you didn't have an overhang or a shading device that can be very useful in these conditions in terms of analysis in the facade. If you don't have that, and if you don't have the curtain, like in here, for example, you're going to have a big issue where that person cannot even see the screen. Yeah, there's not enough contrast, and you're having a very high glare issue here. And then having this element can provide better illuminance, but it doesn't take into account the thermal conditions, because you're letting a lot of heat going through that envelope because the blockout is not blocking that solar radiation. So it's not the best, but we have to understand a lot of these issues and the problems that we identify. And finally, some problems that we identify, like some of the shadings, like if you don't have any system in the outdoors, how do we mitigate that? How do we can provide, that prevent that glare issue, or to prevent, for example, direct sunlight that can actually affect all the archives and books inside. And one particular issue, and I was kind of hesitant to show you this, but I talked to Lindsay and said, no, they will know, they'll understand. One issue that happened, that actually it's been 2 years since it happened, is that we had a lot of protests starting in 2019. And so they block out a lot of the main facades of the buildings that were along the main streets. And so this library, for a whole year, they had OSB on their main facade, and you can only see this little tiny opening of the window because they were afraid of getting all the facade completely broken down. So that's something that it was very particular, very unique of that library. So that's about the research and how a little bit has been working in terms of, in my teaching experience, teaching students about this analysis of measuring physical conditions in the environment and how that you can actually integrate with your design process. So it's a very hands-on experience of teaching. And now I'm going to focus the last part of my practice. So as I was telling you before, we got together, 3 of us, 3 girls, all with PhD. We said, okay, we have to kind of figure out how to do better practice in Chile, in our home country, and how we can actually provide some sort of response in terms of having a comprehensive vision of the built environment, and be committed to provide healthy environments, healthier spaces, and for people and for also a good response to our natural environment. And so the three of us got together during the pandemic that we wanted to develop our own company. All of us got our PhD in the US, and all of us had different specialties. Like Andrea Martinez, who you see in the top, she's a lead APA. She is also a well APA. Alejandra, she has specialized in water in urban settings, and she actually even created a whole code to maximize water management. And me, I'm looking at the inside of the buildings. So all of us are architects, professional architects that we graduated from Chile. Me and Alejandra from UDEC, and then Andrea from Universidad de Chile in Santiago. And we decided, okay, let's try to do this and see how we can actually make a response. So we got one of our first projects. It's a project that actually is in campus. It's a research and postgraduate building that we have to design, and I'm not kidding, in a month. So if you're thinking that you have to do, like your time in studio, time compression doesn't change once you get out of, it's not true. You have to also develop very quickly schemes and design process. So we have to come out, and the task was that we have to develop a project that can be shown to the president of the university, so funding can be granted in a way that can compromise in the future for a future development of a project. So this was kind of like a preliminary design process that we have to go through. So we have two buildings. This is the architectural building, and this is the geography building. And we had a situation where we tried to join those two buildings, but the joining is not working very well. And because our faculty has grown so much, and especially researchers like myself and other colleagues needs more space. And it's always the conflict of space that you need to extend. So we have to figure out a way, how do we can integrate research space, new labs, more space for graduate level programs that we have now 3 master programs and a PhD. And on top of that, we also have to rearrange everything so we don't affect and take away the spaces students have, like laser cutters, plotters, you know all that, right? You don't want to touch that because students will also not like that, and we don't want to take away that. So we have to come up with a way that we can actually bridge those two buildings that right now are not bridging very well. Also, we have to figure out a way, how do we incorporate lighting? As I told you before, our sun is on the north side, and then we're like kind of squeezed in this little tiny space in between. So we have to figure out how we can maximize that north facade and how we can actually make a solution that doesn't affect in a very bad way, this facade here. We have to do very quickly a study of the program and a study of the usage spaces and how we can actually rearrange the space that exists on that ground level. We have 3 different levels, but not all those 3 different levels go all the way across in the center space. So we have to figure out right away, okay, with how many square meters are we working with, how are we taking away, and how we can incorporate that into the design. One of the key components was to try to solve and connect, as you see here, to connect these 2 buildings. And so this centerpiece was very instrumental to create that bridge and connection. And one way that we thought that it could work is that in the university, and this is just to tell you a little bit of the story of the university, our university has a big forum where you see this big campanile. We actually copied the idea from Berkeley, so if you're wondering why does it look like Berkeley, it's because the president came to Berkeley and fell in love with that campus, and we literally copy it. But that at the center, which is a big element that we use as a reference, we have a forum. And that's a public forum that people from the city, when we do activities, come together, and it gets full like this for this concert. We do public concerts or many activities, art, visual animation concerts, anything that you can think of. And this is a gathering spot. And so we said, well, why don't we bring that idea into our proposal, into our project? And thought we start looking at case studies that can actually have like an interior forum. So we can connect those 2 programs that have been kind of segregated, and we haven't been able to interact much with the architecture and the geography. So we looked at reference like Merrill Hall, at the University of Arizona, We like this composition of integrating this internal forum where people can gather, can meet, can even have lunch. The quality of the space, the materiality, for example, like CGF have done here in the Federal Central South building, or a warehouse we like the materiality of wood and the warmth that provides with having a little bit more like an industrial look. And then also how students nowadays meet and how do people interact in new educational spaces that can enhance also the learning activities. You not necessarily have to be in a classroom to interact. You can actually be in a corner or in a space that has good lighting, access to views, which is really important, and that can be an important element for your design. So we designed this with this conceptual idea of having this forum, having this connection, bringing a lot of daylight inside the space to try to create an openness. Even though our buildings are very tight, in a way, sort of have this image of claustrophobic, we're trying to do the inverse. So we try to lay out a way that we can maximize this. So we open the north facade. We kind of shorten a little bit more the facing on the south facade for energy performance. And then we created this sort of like center where people can meet. And this, I'm going to show you briefly some floor plans. So we have the access to geography here. We have the access to architecture. One of the requirements that this building needed to have, because it's focused mostly for research and graduate level, one of the things that happens in our school is that we get lockdowns. When there's protests, everything gets locked down, and professors cannot access their labs. I know that's kind of unique because probably here it doesn't happen, but our professors asked us, we need to make the building work, so when there's lockdowns, we can actually get to our labs and still do research. So we have to figure out ways of how to make access to those points for the professors while we're in lockdowns or protest manifestations. So we built the ground level completely open. We're open studios on both sides, our main forum at the center. We have some areas for kitchenettes and where people can meet, and then a library maker space that is connected to a terrace on the north side. Then on the second level, we resolve basically the main need of the program, which is all these labs. And we distribute all the labs with the same area space facing north, and then they have some spaces where they can meet with their colleagues or their students. And then we have areas for students, lab computers that can be connected along here. And then in this section, which is a little bit cut off, we have a gallery space where people and students can exhibit their work, which we don't have currently. And then we said, well, why don't we do a third level? I know it's more than the budget that the university can ask, but if we don't get the chance now, at least let's present it and see. Because we also need to find a way to integrate the graduate level, the master's students and the new incoming PhD students. They need working environments as well. And so we created a third level with the intention that more than half of that area will be a terrace where they can do a lot of camaraderie, activities and events where people can gather. And it's a unique place because in the university, we don't have that option of having a terrace complete to ourselves where we can do gatherings. So here it's that image of that terrace space on the third level where you can enter. And then we had this big clerestory facade that is the main sort of like attracting space where we actually bring all that light in. So the idea is that to naturally illuminate this whole space. On the north facade, we have some system of controlling that lighting through louvers, horizontal louvers. And then at the ground level, we have all this makerspace studios that can open up and can actually use that terrace. And in the back, we have classroom spaces and then this gallery that projects into the parking lot of public space. And these have some interior images of that space. So it's like a 3-level openness space where students can meet. And then we have the labs accessing here in the second level for all the research, a gallery space, and then the graduate level up above. So you have this notion of always being aware what's happening, something that we kind of don't have right now, and also creating openness, open floor plans that can connect, for example, like you have, and I really appreciate how you have here in Clemson, you open studios that you can see what the students are doing from other studios, and you can interact, because having that openness also provides that interaction with professors, with your classmates, whoever is interacting. And this is kind of like the final images of looking out to that third and terrace space area. And this is just to summarize kind of like some of the passive strategies that we incorporated in the terrace, some active strategies of solar panels. And we also created some space for providing shade during the summer, and maximizing that daylight during winter, and providing protection to that south-facing rain facade that we get a lot of the rain and wind. And then the last project that I wanted to show you, it's a little bit different. It's a native observatory. It's actually an astronomical observatory, but not professionally. It's actually for tourism. So this was actually one of our first projects. And we thought, OK, fine, we're going to do this probably in a month. We were so wrong. This actually project took like a whole year. Because it was so technical. It was super technical, even though it was only 1,000 square footage approximately. It was a project that really made us think of a lot on the technicality of how to make this work. So a client that owns this land in the south part of Chile, I'll show you a plan, has actually a restaurant. And now he upgraded into having a lodge. And he said, I need to have some sort of attraction point as well. The nights here are beautiful. You can see the Milky Way, mostly during summer. I wanted to have that. I wanted to have that connection with the stars. And so he came, and we connected. And then he said, I have this site to build that observatory. So we were working with a building that we're not going to use, but at least the site, it's in there. There's a slight slope that isn't actually in this plinth. But we also have hills, like you see here. And actually, this particular location, as you see here, it's about 4 hours away from Concepcion in a town called Malarcahuello. It's in a different region. Here is the line, the borderline between Argentina and Chile. So a lot of the mountains attraction points are along this area. Hot springs, if you want to get out of the city, this is where you come. And you have images like this, active volcanoes if you look like doing hiking, or another volcano, Yaima, in the national park called Canguillo. So all that attraction points are here, and he is actually connected in the international route into Argentina. So we have to study quite a bit the height of the surrounding buildings, the surrounding hills, to maximize the openness of how much you can observe. So it doesn't, the building itself, the roof of the building doesn't block, it's within the range of whatever can block the natural hills around the surroundings. So we did this study where we're trying to maximize, the heights of the different locations of hills along, and then we did determine, okay, how far and how high can our roof can be, so it doesn't block this part of the sky. Okay, so that took a while. We also took a long time to figure out how we're going to do this. There's multiple ways that you can do an observatory, because you have to have a telescope that has an isolated pillar, and you have to move, most of the time you have to move the roof, right? But a lot of the times, the way the system works, you need to optimize also cost. And so we were trying to optimize cost, because we could get very creative, but then it will never get built if we got too creative, right? If we have different spheres or domes, so to speak. So we have to come up with a solution that was very simple. So we iterate many times and trying to figure out. We actually put the telescope on the second level, as I'm going to explain here, because that way we can actually optimize the viewpoint. So when we lay out, we decided to have and to use a little bit of some of native architecture and sort of like natives from the location are Mapuches and indigenous people that really appreciate the stars. And they have a whole conceptual idea of how to lay out and like relate with the landscape, relate with the land. And there's a whole sort of like grounded heritage that we wanted to also put into this project. So we really maximize the east side of the building to provide a deck that for national or for nights, during the nighttime, they can use for observations. And also to protect this south, because most of the winds come from the northeast. So we wanted to also protect the winds from that side by providing the entrance in this way. And also, providing that connection to the sun on the east side, which is really important. We have to have a small lecture room in the ground level, a kitchenette and a bathroom. And so for the ground level, it's all ADA accessible. Sadly, we were not able to do that on the second level, but since we have this decking and observation, we were able to provide observation for that. And so I was explaining, we maximize the lighting. We have to also close this building during the nighttime as much as we could. So a lot of the east, we open a lot of the east facade, a little bit on the north, and then some windows in the west and south. The box complex element was actually to figure out ways that we can move this. So in terms of the design process, we have to figure out ways that we can move it. So we decided to have a retractable facade that moves the roof, and then also a vertical facade that moves vertically because of the constraints of how much openness you need to have in order so the telescope can have all the sky, all the dome, the sky dome available. We created a ramp access so people can, at least in the ground level, have access to that floor, and then providing shelter on the south facade of the main entrance of the observatory. And here you can see a little bit of this retractable railing. So we have all this roof that kind of slides down and opens up to the back. So you have the main south facade completely open. And one of the things that I didn't mention, but the best things to see in a night is actually in the south facade. Because you have the two Magellan clouds and you have the main objects to see on the south facing. So that also was why we oriented the main openness to the observatory on that side, as you see here. One of the trick elements was also the pillar. The pillar had to have a foundation of 2 meter wide by 2 meter wide and completely isolated. And we were like, but this is like a tiny telescope. Nope, we have to have that because any vibration or any element that can actually induce any vibration to the telescope can really make a mess in terms of the observation. This is not an astronomical observatory, but it still needed to have like completely isolated pillar. So we have a pillar that is more than 4 meters high with a foundation that is 2 by 2. So it's crazy. And so those constraints in terms of figuring out how do the roof move, how do we open that hole, and then how do we maintain the angles was one of the bigger challenges that we sort of integrated. And this is kind of like what you see in this sort of like summary image of integrating the daylighting access together with all the efficiency. Because in here snows, we have to have a very steep slope of roof, more than 30 degrees. It snows about 3 feet. No, sorry, 3 feet. So about like a meter or a little more than a meter. So in order not to create extra weight on the building, we had to have a very steep roof. That's why the inclination here. And also the envelope. We wanted to have a very high, very well-performance envelope. So we use SIP panels with a lot of insulation. So a lot of the building doesn't create any condensation because that also is going to affect when you open up this building when you're trying to observe. So like I explained before, we have the public lecture at the ground level. We can open these windows and we have access to the terrace. And then we have like a small kitchenette, for example, when they do night observation, a lot of the times you have to have coffee for the people to warm up, an ADA accessible bathroom. And then on the second part, we have the deck, the observation deck, where the telescope is. And this kind of lofts down into the ground level. And one of the trick elements was to figuring out, we have this restriction of the height of the roof, the angle of the roof, and then you want to get to the second floor. You don't want to get hit on the roof. So we have all these constraints, and that's why it looks very tight. as you see in the section. And then we were iterating a lot of the materiality. How do we can create all this continuous envelope that it looks into a more uniform project. And these are some final images on the inside. We were thinking of using wood, kind of like what the client has used in his lodge and his restaurant as well. It's a local, very used wood resource, material resource that we use a lot. And then the deck, accent deck to the observation point, which you see here. And that's my last project that I want to show, but it's kind of like to summarize, I try to give you like a whole scope of, how you can include research into, inform your design decision, and how you can also provide, knowledge in terms of that architecture can actually become very technical and can become very scientific if you decided to go into that realm. I was not expecting to go into that realm of research. I thought once I finish my master's, I'll be done and I will practice, but life had a different route for me. But I found that it's interesting to integrate both professionally as well as academically. So that's what I got for you, and I appreciate your time and your effort here. Thank you. Okay.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Rivera. We really appreciate your lecture and the two parts, the research part and then how it informs the design and the design decisions. So we have maybe 10 minutes for questions. If we have 2 or 3, is there anybody who would like to ask a question while we have the floor open?
Firstly, oh, that's loud. Firstly, thank you for the presentation. It was awesome and insightful. My question to you is about the research component with the public schools in Chile. What was the biggest limitation when doing those thermal studies? And then after the research, was there any type of architectural response to improve those conditions?
There were a lot of limitations. One limitation that I was that I had was actually, because the students were so engaged and, they wanted to be very committed to my study. A lot of the times I found that, they probably were too committed. They were not telling me the truth, like how they really felt in the surveys. One of the also constraints that I had is because of my study was so time constrained, I ended up having only 3 months. I have a big embargo coming down to Chile with my equipment that delayed 2 months of my research. And so I have to cramp the 3 months. And so I really didn't get to do a survey where I can extend the length of measuring the conditions. So I only had to do like 1 day or like a morning and an afternoon. So I wish I had like a little bit more like a long profile of measurements to see how people really interact with the space and how things vary in terms of the conditions. And my intention is to change the code. I'm working on that in terms of my publishing as well as my connections now with my new center. We're making a lot of effort of changing and having a more political policy making change. And because of COVID, things have actually, it was everything aligned. I mean, not in a negative way, in the sense that I was not glad that COVID happened, but I'm glad that it did happen because it became more aware of the conditions that professors were doing and students were actually doing, because kids really froze during COVID, because we didn't have any mechanical system or anything to mitigate, and they really had to rely on having the windows open, which created even more cold conditions. So I'm pushing for that and trying to make awareness with my grant and with my research. Well, thank you for your question.
To the Chile school study, right? So I'm familiar with Brazil, and I don't know whether Chile is the same way, but people tend to be, the comfort zone for people is different in different places, right? So in Brazil, for example, people don't heat their homes, even though it might get to, 50 degrees or 40 degrees outside, and they put jackets on naturally in their homes, right? So is the Chilean culture similar to other parts of South America, where maybe people are more acclimated to adapting themselves to their environment as opposed to having a highly conditioned environment, which we seem to have in the United States? Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yes. Is that all? Is it working? Yeah. So as you said, people tend to, especially in the south part of Chile, we tend to have a comfort zone that shifts. So like when I showed in that graph, we can make actually an argument that in those conditions, and we're seeing a lot of the literature and the research, that we can pull that and we can make that zone wider. There are people that can be even comforted in very extreme hot weather conditions like the Middle East, right? And so we can actually, there's an argument that we can even say more energy, if we can expand that comfort zone. In the sense of Chile, it's true. A lot of people there's a cultural, more acknowledgement that you can use. A lot of the times we're very bundled up during winter in our homes because, we have this sense of awareness of how much the cost of electricity is, and because our buildings are not very well. But at the same time, I also feel like we've gotten too used to of being in bad conditions. And I feel like that has not been sort of connected in terms of the health impacts. And we do have high levels of people getting really sick in winter, especially young kids and senior people. And we statistically have that also, people going to the emergency room because of respiratory diseases. So I also feel like we had to also keep an eye on, like, yes, we can get comfortable in those conditions, but at the same time, we have to pay attention to the health associated.
Hey, sorry. Thank you so much for your presentation. I was very intrigued with the slide that you show about, Chile's geographic condition, and then the northern part is like desert, southern part is like Patagonia, is like extremely different climate conditions, and then you were like, but it's exactly the same school design. So I wonder if there was any kind of was there any part in your research that you looked into that overarching mass-produced, let's put it that way, like school designs that is across the board the same for the country? Because in many modern nation-building stories, when it comes to these institutions, school institutions, especially in in these developing countries or newly established countries in the 21st century, they do have these schemes of straightforward school education, ideological and pretty following modernism ideals. They don't necessarily respond to context or site or whatever, but it's more ideological and over-empowered, and imposed, top down. I wonder if you ever looked into, was there anything in your research that you also talked about that part, or was there anything relevant to what I'm actually saying right now about that?
Question. On my current research, no. What I try to do is try to look at same typologies, so I can actually, kind of take away those a little bit of confounding differences in terms of the design. But my colleagues actually look in a very particular period of time when we have a new, actually 1990s, before 1997, we had a big reform, educational reform. Most of our schools were not for the whole day. And so you have kids that will come in the morning for a small segment in the morning and then in the afternoon. And so we have they changed that. They wanted to have the kids for the entire length of the school. So a lot of this reform affected that they have to do a mass production of schools. They have to increment their square footage and also provide more schooling because they needed to have the schools for a whole length of the day. And that actually created huge changes in terms of, focusing more, like you said, on the mass production of providing all the schools square footage rather than actually providing the best conditions. So we did look a little bit that, in the 1940s and the 50s, there was a lot more acknowledging of daylight illumination. So the building heights, for example, from floor to ceiling were a lot higher than during this period of mass production of schools that, the most focus was actually to create more classroom spaces, more square footage, but not necessarily, providing best illumination. Yes, yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yes, there were some, actually in the public schools, there was a little bit more sensitivity and a little bit, well, there were more resources, right? So they pay a lot of attention on finishing and kind of like the indoor design of furniture, et cetera. But the building itself, like the whole building envelope and the construction, it was the same. I didn't see any big differences. Even I was surprised because in some of the private schools, I saw heating systems, but they were not operable. A lot of times they were broken, or a lot of times they didn't want to pay for the electrical bill. But just in retrospect, they were slightly a little bit better, but not very significantly better, which was to my surprise. Good, a lot of questions.
Sorry. I think it's fascinating that your research drives your work, so thank you for sharing both aspects of that. My question is, our studio this semester is designing, our site is in Santiago, Chile. Do you have any advice for how an American should design for Chile?
Wow. What studio is that? Okay. Well, come to Chile if you can. Wow, Santiago is it's a whole game ball too. Santiago, if you've done research in Santiago, it's right at the foothills of the Andes. So it's very different in terms of climate. I mean, within the climate of most of the coastal cities in Chile, we have a very temperate climate. But in Santiago, because you're right at the edge of the foothills, you get this big oscillation between day and night, especially in winter. So it can get really cold. And in previous years, I think it even snowed at the foothills. So you have that stream. And then it's very dense. 1/3 of the country lives in Santiago. So I don't know exactly where your site is, but it also has, depending where you are, you could be confronted with heat island effects as well. So, but yeah, I think it's very interesting. So if you want to talk more about it, I'm happy to talk more.
Oh, sorry, we had one more. David, did you want to add one? Okay.
Well, I just had a technical question about the last project, the observatory. So the roof retracts. So is it ever an enclosed space, or is it always open to the air? So I was trying to figure out how the end closed off when when it retracted and came out, and I wasn't quite sure I understood that.
So I don't know if I can show this again. So we actually did two things. Probably didn't explain this part, but this facade slices down, and then this slices that way. So we have vertical and horizontal, and then you